Welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is military affairs, and this video is about the artillery weapons used in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and it would be part 3. Well, as we know, well, if we're not aware of it yet, the war in Ukraine is mostly a war conducted by the force of Russia in an arbitration type of conflict, where artillery plays a huge role in their armament and in their tactics. And therefore it is important to understand what the weapons are available and what the limitations are and what the effect is and how they do it. This is currently not a question of artillery tactics, but more what type of weapons are used by both forces. While the Russian doctrine and tactics are so highly dependent on artillery bombardment, that the whole military is configured around it, and it stems basically from the Second World War onwards, or maybe even before that. Now, I'm not totally sure if they have changed it in the medium. There's a lot of confusing information, but if you look at the current conflict, artillery plays a big part. But one has to understand, well, not how to understand it, but there's one thing that sort of baffled me a lot. And that is the counter-battery radars or anti-artillery weapons, well, detection systems. One of the things I never could understood is why the Russians allowed the consistent bombing for 9 months now of Donetsk city. Why couldn't they locate the artillery, the Ukrainian artillery, and why couldn't they do counter-artillery and destroy those units? And it's one of those things I couldn't understand. And then we had addition of the HIMARS, and again, the Russians didn't locate these HIMARS, and they didn't destroy them. Instead, they opted for employing air defense systems and shooting down the missiles, the HIMARS missiles, as they approach the targets. And then we had the M777 that was delivered, and yes, some of them were destroyed by the Russians, but I thought that the initial phase of the Russian-Ukrainian war was at the beginning of this SMO, the Russians destroyed most of the weapon systems of Ukrainians. And if you have read the daily reports from the Russian Ministry of Defense, then it lists the amount of weapons that have been destroyed during that day and the total given for the whole SMO. Now, I've also pointed out that there are some discrepancy in these reports, and unfortunately I have to maybe admit or state that I believe the Russian Ministry of Defense is lying. Whether it's lying intentionally, that's a matter of discussion if you want, but the numbers don't gel. As I've pointed out many times ago, is that there are, again, every second day there's a Ukrainian aircraft being shot down, and it now is more than double what it is stated that the Ukrainians had at the beginning of the SMO. So something is wrong there. What? I don't know. Every time Ukraine is attacked, there is another list of tanks and artillery and whatever is being destroyed. But the Ukrainians are just coming, and they're never running out of weapons. It's similar like the Western narrative, the Russians are running out of missiles. So all these things sort of baffled me, and that is one of the reasons why I started with this series of the weapons being used, and now we have reached the point of the artillery pieces. But before I do that, I would like actually to quickly list what counter-battery systems are available and what are the parameters and limitations. And then you can review basically how the artillery pieces match up to them and why it's a problem in locating enemy radar or enemy artillery pieces. Now, when I initially planned this video, I couldn't understand, I didn't know how to format it because there's a lot of information on some systems and a lack of systems information on other systems. And some of them was really not relative for a discussion. If you are interested, there's a lot of information. Google it, it's fine, no problem. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically show you a picture just to understand how it looks like of each system, and then discuss the important parameters of these systems so that you can make a decision or understand how this thing is structured. So the first thing I would like to talk about is the Russian-Soviet counter-artillery radars. And the most well-known or important one is the Zoopark-1. Another name is 1L219, but everybody talks about the Zoopark. It did go under certain modifications and so on, but basically a slight improvement. And also these things are now manufactured in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are manufacturing a Zoopark version 3. But it doesn't have much better capability than a Russian Zoopark 2, but we will get to that. The Zoopark was actually developed in the former Soviet Union in 1980, and then it became operational in 1989. And there is no indication that the Ukrainian forces have such a system that was developed by the Soviet Union. But there is information available that a Zoopark 3 has been manufactured and developed in Ukraine. And it's quite interesting, the more I research these weapons, it seems to me Ukraine was a significant arms manufacturer, because a lot of the armament of the Soviet Union was actually manufactured in Ukraine. So one can understand that they have a military or industrial complex. And that is the reason why they were able to do the Zoopark 3. In any case, you can look at the Zoopark 1, which I'm just going to quickly discuss. And it's completely anonymous, and it needs about 5 minutes to set up. The problem with these radar systems is that the cross area that they have to detect and monitor varies between various objects. Now, an aircraft is fairly big, so there's a big radar signature because there's a big cross-section area. And so you can talk about ballistic missiles are fairly big, cruise missiles are fairly big, and HIMARS are fairly big, and so on. And then the Grad systems are a little bit smaller, so it's more difficult to detect them. And then we have the small artillery pieces like the 155 or the 120 or the 106 artillery ammunition. The smaller they get, the smaller is a cross-sectional area, and therefore the radars have difficulties picking up and locating them. And then basically the effective range at which these systems can detect those incoming missiles or artillery is reduced. So that's why I'm going to discuss the first time, is that the radar can track artillery shells of 82 to 120 millimeter, which is typical mortar ammunition, up to a distance of 17 kilometers. And then it can detect 105 to 155 projectiles at a distance of 12 kilometers, multiple launch rocket systems at distance of 22 kilometers, and then the tactical missiles at ranges of up to 45 kilometers. Now, if you look at the kilometers, it's quite a fair distance. And if you look out your window or you think about how long you have to drive to your town next door to what you live, then that's quite a significant distance. But you will see artillery pieces do have range beyond this capability. And then there's one problem with this Zoopark. It has an active radar system. That means it sends out radar signals, and therefore it can be detected by the enemy. And thereby you can send a typical anti-radar system like a harm system, a harm missile, or if you are in range of the enemy's artillery, they will quickly react and then bombard you, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, if it's you, but if you are the enemy, they would hope to destroy you. In any case, there was an improved system, which then could assist their own artillery. So basically, when their own artillery fires, they can spot where the rounds have fallen, and then they can adjust the aim of their own artillery. So basically, it can be used in detecting artillery and also improving and adjusting your own artillery fire. Now, well, there's also, like I said, the larger missiles, which you can detect at, sorry, there was a variant, Zoopark 1M, which you can also call Zoopark 2. And that can detect radar system, artillery, 155mm artillery shells at the range of 23, or 27 for 203mm shells. Now we'll get also to the 203mm later on. And then it can detect artillery rockets like the Grads at 32 and 45 kilometers. And then it can start detecting the ATAC size tactical ballistics like the harm missile, the army, like the, what the hell, HIMARS, and up to a distance of 65 kilometers. So this is quite a huge improvement. If you look at, unfortunately, these things also have a minimum detection range, so, and that is 12 kilometers for both systems, so number 1 and number 2. So you can see there's a minimum distance and a maximum distance, and the maximum distance depends on the type of, incoming artillery round or missile size, as well as the location or the distance you are basically from that point, and what model you have. Well, the system can track aerial targets, up to 12 targets simultaneously. They can also, the whole system is set up within 5 minutes, and they are operated by a crew of 3. Now, as you can see, they are basically self-propelled units. Then we get to another Russian system, which is called penicillin. Okay, penicillin, and another name for it is 1B75. The Russians like to use numbers. And as I stated, the problem with the Zoopark 1 is that it has a radar system and therefore can be detected, and the enemy can hone in on its position. And therefore it becomes vulnerable. While the penicillin works on a totally different system. It's a passive system, and it uses acoustic thermal artillery reconnaissance technology. In the same sense, it tries to detect and locate enemy artillery mortars, multiple rocket launchers, anti-aircraft or any tactical missiles firing positions, and it also uses then seismic and acoustic sensors without emitting any radio waves. So this is very, more or less very undetectable, if you want to call it. And it can detect this position of the enemy artillery within 5 seconds, up to a range of 25 kilometers. Now, these units have completed their state trials in December 2018, and it entered combat duty in 2020. But unfortunately, the data is very limited about these units. What I can understand is that the system is able to record acoustic and thermal signals from shots and bursts of artillery shells, and it gives out the exact coordination of the location of the enemy guns. So it's fairly accurate. Unlike most other systems, similar systems, it combines the principles of thermal and sound sensors, or it makes it possible to suppress it electronically. It has basically 6 sensors or cameras, television and thermal imaging on a very high mast. They are basically fixed in 2 positions on the mast, and this mast can rotate and around. The cameras have a view angle of about 70 degrees in azimuth and 10 degrees in elevation. And basically there is a sound vibration center placed into the ground. Now all the signals from all 12 devices simultaneously transmitted to the computers, and together with a vibration sensor, the position or the direction of the enemy artillery is determined. And it gives you a very high accuracy and detailed picture of the situation in the area of operation of the complex. And it can also give target designation to your own artillery once it has located the enemy artillery battery. It can also calculate the coordinates of the shells, enemy shells, and where they will land, and also where the artillery of its own forces falls, and then it can adjust the fire and the fire directive of its own forces. Basically, what the penicillin does, it monitors the surrounding area for flashes from any cannon shots or missile launches. And in parallel, the sound receivers monitor the ground vibrations generated by the firing or explosion of the shells. And then using optics, the direction to the flash is determined, and the distance is calculated from the time difference between the optical and the sound signals. And then this data is converted into coordinates and transmitted to the command post. And just for instance sake, a unit like this costs about $14 million. Well, we still do it today. So I'm not sure how many of these systems are available and used currently by Russia. It is that information not available even if I Googled extensively. And if one also considers how long or how wide the front lines are, like 1,000 kilometers, then one can understand why it's difficult to determine and where enemy artillery is, because they constantly move. They set up their position, they fire a couple of shots, and then they withdraw to a new position. So this is not an easy game, is a very strong word, but it's a difficult operation. And then we can look at some of the radar systems that were the counter-battery radar systems that were given to the Ukrainians. And the first one we look at is the American ANTPQ-34 Firefinder. Now, here's a nice picture of it. It's not very big. It's not so big as the Russian versions. It has about a maximum range of 24 kilometers with an effective range of 18 kilometers for artillery, and then the 24 kilometers for the rockets. Unfortunately, when I discuss these American versions, they sometimes specify the maximum distance, but I don't tell you for what type of ammunition it can detect. So if it says basically the maximum, that is a marketing ploy, and it will probably be valid for the bigger missiles like the HIMARS. The artillery, detecting the artillery shells would be a lot shorter distance. In any case, this American system was designed in the 1970s and fielded in 1982. And the US Army actually delivered to the Ukrainians 2 units in 2015. And then Netherlands Minister of Defense delivered 5 units in March of this year. And then in April, the US Army delivered another 10 units to Ukraine, and then another 3. So in total, you're looking at about 20 units being fielded by the Ukrainian Army. Now, how many of these systems are still functional? That is a debatable point because there's no information for that. But 20 is 20. And that's a fair amount of it. Well, the system can locate about 10 incoming shells now. It can do it, the correlated targets on the first round that is fired. And it can perform high burst, datum plane, and impact registrations. It can also be used to adjust friendly fire and interface to tactical fire and predict the impact of hostile projectiles. And this system is operated by a crew of 6. And then we get to the bigger system, also American system. And it's also got a name like AN/TPQ-53, Quick Reaction Capability Radar, that's what it's called. This is about the size of what the Russians are fielding. And it's not the latest system, but it's a fairly new system. It was delivered to the US Army in 2009. And currently it's the most advanced counter-fire radar of the US Army with a detection range of 60 kilometers. But like I've stated, it does not say for what it detects at that range. So one has to assume it would be the bigger missiles because that is a tendency. So after the Russian-backed separatists started operating tanks in eastern Ukraine, the US started sending military items to Ukraine, including 20 of these 53 radar systems in 2015. So what this means actually is that the Ukrainians have received these systems and their previous system, the smaller version, already in 2015 when they were preparing, or when they were trained by NATO and the Americans. So they should be fairly well trained in operating these systems. Now, I'm not sure whether this was maybe a test system, a test phase for the Americans, because at the end of the day, the Ukrainian combat experience against the Donbass militias led to that they were providing training to the US forces. They'd say other way around. So then we come to another system, which I've mentioned before. That's the Russian Zoopark 2. Now again, the above 2 system plus the Zoopark 2 is being currently fielded by the Ukrainian forces. It is locally manufactured in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I believe there's only 1 unit delivered in 2021. And the other ones were still on manufacturing, so I'm not sure how many of these units are currently fielded. But the Ukrainians have the capability to manufacture these items, and again, whether Russia has destroyed it by a precision missile factory, that is also not known. So the availability of this system is a little bit dubious. But if you consider the previous systems, there are at least 40 counter battery radars from the Americans fielded, and maybe 1 or 2 of the Zoopark 2. It is basically the Zoopark 2 is a very similar characteristics as a upgraded Zoopark 1. And it has a detection range for 155mm artillery rounds for about 30 kilometers. It can detect artillery rockets between 30 and 55 kilometers. That's a little bit questionable. And then ballistic missiles, like I said, the bigger ones up to 80 kilometers. And again, setup time is about 5 minutes. You can track aerial targets, about 12 of them. It's operated by a crew of 5. And in total, Ukraine has initially ordered 10 of these, of which I know one was delivered. So the status of the other 9 is not known. Okay. So this is more or less a background on what counter battery systems can do. And I know it's difficult to remember, but I will summarize all these systems in the table at the end of the video, and then you can compare it. Now, Russian artillery units have inherited a lot of the Soviet Union military equipment. Some of them is very old, and it's not clear whether some of the old systems are still being used by Russia. But there are some systems like the 122 millimeter towed artillery piece that is fairly old system, but it's so good that it's still accepted and still functioning very well in the current modern world. But I will get to that. So the first one I would like to start off is the Russian 120 millimeter mortar. As you can see, here's a nice picture. It's very small compared to a proper cannon, if you want to call it. This one mortar is called the 2B23 Nomna. It is a single tube 120 millimeter caliber mounted on 2 wheels, and it is a single axis carriage system. This mortar has a maximum range of 8.8 kilometers and a minimum range of 900 meters. And it shoots high explosive projectiles. So again, you see, a system has a minimum range as well. And in my previous videos, I talked about what the Chechen tactics were. They would race forward to a distance of 200 meters from the Russian troops, so they couldn't be targeted by any large artillery system, nor by any large mortar system. And then what remains is typical, like a 60 millimeter mortar, but those things are not that effective. Anyway, so the rate of fire with a high explosive projectile is about 9 rounds per minute, and it's about 11 rounds per minute with an explosive bomb, and it's operated by a crew of 5. And the accuracy of the system, just for indication's sake, is 27 meters. In terms of the range of, it's 27 meters and the range of 8.8 kilometers and 7.2 meters in terms of direction. One has to think about, when artillery is fired, there are a number of factors that have an influence on the accuracy. You can look typically at mass distribution and variation in charges and so on. Then you can also look at the temperature of the tubes or the barrel. And naturally, when you fire the first round, then you usually move a little bit and then you have to readjust. And if you don't do that adjustment, well, then you're going to be off target. And then we also have wind and other factors that play a role. So shooting artillery is similar like shooting a sniper rifle, in which you have to consider. And now we come to the big guns. The Russians don't use the 155 millimeter. They have a 152 millimeter howitzer. But it's more or less the same. And the first one we are looking for is the 2A65. Well, I call it Mr. B, but it's actually Imstar B. Here's a nice picture. And again, they created a self-propelled version, and the self-propelled version is called the 2S19, Mr. S. And you can see a nice picture. And then we can see more or less a sort of a parameters on what these systems were. The towed version was designed or was operational in service since 1987 till today. And the self-propelled version got into service in 1982, which was 2 years later, and in service until today. The original mass of the towed version was about 6.8 tons. The length was about 2.7 meters. And the barrel length was 7.2 meters. And the towed version was operated by a crew of between 6 and 11 guys. And the self-propelled version is operated by a crew of 5. Now, both of them are actually firing a range of Russian missiles, but I will get to it now. The elevation of the towed version, that means the height or the angle between the barrel and the ground. The elevation for the towed version is between minus 3.5, so it can go lower than the horizontal, and up to degrees of 70s to the top position. And the self-propelled version is minus 4 degrees up to an upper limit of 68 degrees. And then you can have the traverse direction. That means how much can it rotate from its center around its axis. Well, for the towed version, it has 28 degrees, which means basically going 14 degrees to the left and 14 degrees to the right. And cool. And then for the self-propelled, it has a turret, and the turret can turn around to 360 degrees. So changes in direction and is a lot better in the self-propelled version than the stationary version, and that is quite logical. The rate of fire of this system, the towed version is 5.6 rounds, and the self-propelled version is 6 to 8 rounds per minute. And the maximum fire range, quite interesting, is that the maximum fire range for the towed version is 29 kilometers, and for the self-propelled version, that looks like a tank, it's about 25 kilometers. And then it's quite interesting that the production of this these systems, of the towed version, the Russians currently have about 196 of these towed versions, and the Ukrainians 130. But when it comes to the self-propelled version, the Russians have about 1,500 of these units, and the Ukrainians only have 85. So given the numbers, this type of system must be fairly important for the Russians. Now, I just want to quickly mention some different ammunition for these artillery pieces. The Russians have a range of, or not only the Russians, Ukrainians will have it also. They have a range of different projectiles for their artillery system. Now we have the standard high explosive round, and that's usually the distance that the maximum distance that it can fire is given. So in this case, it's 25 kilometers. And just to get a feeling, a round is about 43 kilograms. Now that's nearly a bag of cement. It's quite heavy. And if you're an artillery man and you have to carry this round all day, you're going to suffer. But in any case, so this is like for a normal round, which has a flat bottom, if you want to call it. Then you can add a base bleed. And the function of the base bleed is basically to change the aerodynamics of the round. And that usually increases the distance due to less drag. And in this case, the distance increased from 25 to 29 kilometers. And then you can screw on a rocket, artillery rocket, then it becomes a rocket-assisted artillery round. Now this is like a small rocket motor putting into the missile, and then you can increase the range of this artillery pieces to 40 kilometers. And then you can go back and you look at the original artillery round size. And then they call it a cargo round. And this one contains about 42 high explosive anti-tank bomblets. And these can penetrate 100mm armor. So what you can effectively do is, if you see a lot of infantry APCs and infantry vehicles with a little bit of armor approaching, then you can bomb them with this artillery round. And that will penetrate the armor of the APCs. And then you will take them out. And then you even get a radio jamming around. So you can fire around, it probably lies around there, and that jams the enemy's radar or so. And then you create, if you haven't heard, the Americans have a precision-guided bomb, which is called the Excalibur. And the Russians have something similar. It's called the Krasnopol laser-guided round. And then apart from that, you get actually different types as well, more, like chemical pieces, smoke, concrete piercing, incendiary, and even a tactical nuclear round. Can you imagine? Well, the nuclear round has a yield about 0.1 to 0.2 kilotons. And then we come by the second artillery piece of the Russians. It's the 122mm howitzer. And it's called D30, that's the old name, but the classification is 2A118. And here's a nice picture of it. And again, you get a self-propelled version, which is called Gvozdika 2S1. And if you have watched some videos on when the Russians now went to Bulgaria for this protective force, I think about 9,000 troops, you could see the trains loaded with trucks and tanks, and you can actually see this type of self-propelled artillery piece. Any case, so again, comparing, the towed version was a very old, fairly old system. It was developed in 1960. It's still being used today. And the self-propelled version came into service in 1972. This towed piece is a lot lighter than the previous version. It only weighs 3.2 kilograms. And the length is less, is 5.4 meters. The barrel length is only 4.66 meters. And the third version is operated by a crew of 8. In this case, the self-propelled version is only operated by a crew of 4. Again, these systems have a range of shell types that they can fire, similar to the 152mm. Well, just remember, this is 122, so it's about 30 millimeters diameter less. Both of them can have an elevation of between -7 degrees up to 70 degrees, and both of them can actually rotate 360, even the towed version. So it makes it very versatile. And then we have the rate of fire, between 5 and 6 rounds per minute for both of them. And the normal, while it's a smaller round, it's a smaller barrel, so it only has a maximum firing distance of 15.4 kilometers. And if you make it rocket systems, it can go up to 22 kilometers. And then we have the production and use of these systems. And of the towed version, the Russians have 4,570 of these units. And Ukraine has only 129. That's the towed version. But if you look at the self-propelled version, then Russia has 622 units, and Ukrainians have 676. That's more than the Russians. Again, like I said, they have HE rounds, they have fléchette rounds, and it gives such a sort of a blade type of pellet that it shoots out. It can be used as an anti-tank weapon, so it has anti-tank ammunition, illumination, smoke, and also the laser-guided precision ammunition. And then we come to the big gun of the Soviet Union. It's called the Pion 2S7. It is a self-propelled 203mm cannon. This is quite a big thing. It was in service in 1975 till about 1990. The barrel length is 12 meters, which is incredibly long. It is operated by 14 soldiers. Just for instance, sakes, a shell weighs 110 kilograms. That's more than 2 bags of cement. It has a typical elevation of 0 to 60 degrees and transverse of 30 degrees. So it doesn't have a turret, but it has to move a little bit. And it only can fire about 1.5 rounds per minute. But what it does is it goes and sets up and then fires 2 shots. And before those 2 shots actually hit the target, it can withdraw and go see something, go to a new position. Now, the maximum range for the standard round is 37.5 kilometers. And with a rocket-assisted one, it goes up to 55.5 kilometers. Now, that can become like a counter-artillery type of round. Well, it is an old system. It was made in the Soviet Union. So if it's in the Soviet Union, Ukraine would probably have had inherited some of them, and it did. And currently, Russia possesses about 320 of these units, and Ukraine 99. But what's quite interesting also is that this 12-meter long gun weighs about 14.6 tons, and the barrel only lasts for 450 rounds, and then it has to be replaced. So as you can see, wear and tear, these things are monsters, which is not that easy to, well, they don't last forever. And then we come to the famous N777 howitzer, which is a British towed 155 artillery piece. And here you can have a nice picture, probably somewhere in a desert. And this unit has been put into service in 2005 and still being used. And as far as I understand, there were some orders for this system from Britain, so they're going to restart production. It has a barrel length of 5 meters, which is not that long, and is operated by a crew of 1, probably the aimer, and then 7 crews that assist them. Again, typically, there's a lot of shells that cannot be fired by the system. The standard one is M107, and then the guided system is the M982 Excalibur, the precision ammunition. Similar to the Russians, they have elevation between 0 degrees and 71. And they have a transverse rotation of 46, which is better than some of the Russians. And the sustain rate is about 2 rounds per minute. And the maximum firing range is 23 kilometers. And if you do rocket assisted, it can go to 40 kilometers. But I have seen a report that says that the Americans or the British sometimes lie. I think the maximum distance this system has ever fired, I think, was 35 kilometers. So, and I don't think it ever achieved, maybe that's a theoretically value, but it never achieved that distance. And about 122 of these units were given to the Ukraine, so they should be operational. We hear sometimes that they're being destroyed by the Russians, but I didn't keep track of them, and I can't find any other tracks. But what, again, quite interesting, that the Excalibur round has a length of 1 meter, which is quite long for an artillery round. You know, when you see them standing in the photographs, you think, hey, not that long. But these things are fairly monsters, actually, 1 meter long by 155 diameter. And the warhead alone weighs 22 kilograms. And the accuracy of this Excalibur is 4 meter radius, so it's quite accurate. But then, the cost of those units is $68,000 for one Excalibur round. Nearly 70,000. And that was a price in 2016. And compare that, the cost of a normal 155mm round is $3,800, which is still expensive. Oh, that's a lot of money for a simple artillery round. And then we come to our famous German Panzer Haubitze 2000, the self-propelled howitzer that is sort of breaking down, which is a disgrace for a German engineering. And these things came into service in 1998 until today, and still being used today. The barrel length is 8 meters. As you can see, it's longer than the 777. And it's operated by a crew of 7. Again, it fires a range of standard NATO rounds. Elevation is better. It's at minus 2.5 degrees up to 65. And it can rotate 360 degrees. So it can shoot, it can adjust fire very easily. And it fires 10 rounds per minute. The normal standard round is a maximum range between 30 and 36 kilometers. And then we have the record-breaking 67-kilometer rocket-assisted firing. And why I'm talking so slow is that specific round is a South African manufactured round, and that was fired in November in 2019, and I actually worked on the system. So you can say that this round is the furthest any 155mm round has ever traveled, and it was designed and manufactured in South Africa. I just gotta say that. Any case, the system was supposed to be designed for 100 rounds per day. That is what the Germans said, and that should be a fair amount of firing. While the Ukrainians overloaded it and fired more or less 300 rounds per day. And then these things started to fail, and now I think all of them are back in Poland for repairs. But what's quite interesting is that Germany delivered 12 of these units to Ukraine, and now Ukraine has ordered another 100 of the German artillery for about 1.7 billion euros. But we have to see when it's going to be delivered. And now we come to our final monster. That's the French Caesar 155mm. And here's a photo of it in action, and I think it's a brilliant photo. Seriously. Seeing that missile, that projectile leaving the battle, that's quite something significant. In any case, the French Caesar was manufactured in 2008 and is still being used. Has a similar length as a German version of 8.6 meters and is operated by a crew of 6. And again, it does all of the NATO rounds. Elevation 0 degrees to 60. And unfortunately, it can only transverse 30 degrees, and therefore, then after that, the truck has to be moved. It has a slower rate, between 4 and 6 rounds per minute. And unfortunately, the maximum distance of this I cannot verify, and it sounds a little bit out. Because at the end of the day, the range of an artillery round is how much propellant do you put inside there? How long is the barrel of the gun, and how heavy is the round? So unless they design it for a higher pressure, and because then they could put in more propellant, then they can get a further range, and according to them, the standard round is 42 kilometers. And with the rocket assisted round, it goes up to 50 kilometers. Now, currently, Ukraine has been given 18 of these units, and apparently another 12 are on their way. Now, these are the artillery systems that are currently being used, mainly used by the Russians and the Ukrainians. Yes, they do use other ones. They are 105 millimeters, but I didn't want to cover that. Otherwise, we're just going to talk and talk and talk. And if you want to listen to smaller mortars as well. Anyway, just to finish it off, basically, I was looking at the kill zone, or the danger zone, and the common 120 millimeter mortar has a lethal radius of about 30 meters from the point of impact. And it has been given a 10% probability of incapacitation at 100 meters. So that means if you're 100 meters away from the impact zone, there's a 10% chance you might be injured. But if you are in a radius of 30 meters, that could be lethal. But things are not always 100%. So for some common types at a distance of 7 kilometers, the chance of a projectile landing within 100 meters from the target might only be just 50%. So that means it's not that accurately. It has a probability of 50% to be within 100 meters of the intended target. And the fair distance, that's 7 kilometers. Now, as we look at the 155 millimeter, which is very similar to the 152, the Russian one, it will generally have a kill radius of 50 meters, with fragmentation spreading significantly further. In fact, it can go up to 500 meters, but then you're pushing the envelope. But if you're a range of 50 meters, then there's a very good chance you will be killed. It should also be noted that the radius represents a distance where 50% of the people within the radius would be killed or injured. So there's again, it doesn't mean 100% that all people will be killed. Well, sometimes it's also like when you now have to consider opposing forces, infantry and so on. You cannot fire a 155 millimeter round on your enemy if your enemy is nearer than 600 meters from you, because that is called the danger zone, according to the American Field Manual. So anything in that distance up to 500 meters, 600 meters from the impact zone can be dangerous. And the reason why it is also so is that the 600 meters includes the blast radius of the shell plus the degree and accuracy of the firing solution. That means that the shell doesn't fall 600 meter pinpoint. It can fall any distance in that 600 meter, and then you still have to add that 50 meter or 100 meter kill zone. And as I've explained before, many of these items, there's a lot of factors that actually influence the accuracy and chances of an artillery round being pinpoint or reaching its target. Now here, basically, you can see a summary, sort of a table, where I listed all the parameters, and you can compare it. And what is more important, a lot of information is just for intersects, to make a comparative analysis, if you want to call it. But what I would like to do is also you have to look at this, the counter battery capabilities, and then compare these type of units and how they stack up to each other. And now you have to think about, firstly, this is radial distances. So if you are directly opposite to each other, then that is a distance. But if you are a little bit offset, like offset, then the distance is actually reduced. And if you think about the length of the front and the limited quantities of these things available, then I would think that most of the times there are no counter-battery systems available for artillery or for the troops. And then the alternative is usually UIVs. And that's why we see such a high implementation of UIVs. Now, in the old days, before UIVs, we usually had spotters. But with spotters, they cannot be used anymore because how do they talk and give directions back to their commanders? By radio link. And as soon as you have radio link, then the counter-electronic warfare systems will pick up your position and know where the observer is, and then immediately take him out by artillery fire or some other means, the spotter. So, also if you do an active system radar system, then that radar system can be detected, and if it falls within the range of the HIMARS or the German one with a South African 150mm round, then that unit will be taken out. So it's not that easy anymore. And if you consider these factors, then you can finally understand why is it so difficult to pinpoint the artillery and destroy them so that they stop bombing into their city. And also, I have shown you how many of these units are available to the Ukrainians as well. Now, there's this concern. Yeah, the information on the pro-Russian side is also a little bit biased. Like I said, what information is really available from how many Ukrainian systems have been destroyed? I'm sorry to say, but the only source, real source, is the Ministry of Russian Defense. Daily reports. That tells you what the losses are for the Ukrainians. However, I've shown you in many previous videos, that's starting to become suspect. Doesn't make sense anymore. So one has to really ask yourself, how many of these systems do the Ukrainians still have? And are they really that weak? And are we not underestimating the Ukrainian forces? And just remember, the Ukrainian forces have been on a constant bombardment by the Russians for the last 9-10 months. And I'm sure they have adjusted their tactics. And I'm sure they have adapted. And if you want, you can see footage on Telegram and so on, where the Ukrainians have destroyed Russian systems. You cannot deny that. If you deny that, then you are living in a bubble. Any case, this is my video for today. Hopefully you did learn something. My next video I will probably do on multiple rocket launchers, because they also play a huge effect. And then I still want to make one about UIVs, because they are also very important. And then we'll see what other systems are available that has an influence. So until next time, well, sorry. If you like what you heard, subscribe to the channel. Didn't like what you heard? Too bad. Share the link, tell your friends, and until next time, cheers.